My husband's sister looked me up and down on the sunbaked Miami dock and laughed. "You do not belong on this trip," she sneered, holding up a VIP guest list that had my name deliberately crossed out and replaced with her personal yoga instructor. I stood there as the oppressive Florida heat beat down on us and watched my own husband turn his back, completely ignoring my public humiliation. "Go home, Zuri," she told me loudly enough for the other marina guests to hear. "You just do not fit our luxury aesthetic." I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not even raise my voice. Instead, I simply waited for the captain of the $30 million super yacht to walk down the ramp, bypass her completely, and bow his head to me. "Welcome aboard, owner," he said. "Before I tell you how I ended up evicting my husband and his toxic family from my private dock, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who they are dealing with. My name is Zuri. I am 35 years old, and for the last 7 years I have lived a double life. To the business world, I am the founder and chief executive officer of a highly lucrative boutique acquisitions firm. To my husband Andre and his painfully arrogant family, I am just a mid-level hospitality consultant who works too many hours to book basic hotel rooms for corporate events. The discrepancy between who I actually am and who they believe I am was not an accident. It was a carefully constructed shield designed to protect my peace from a family that thrived on making others feel small. Growing up in a hardworking, working-class neighborhood in Atlanta, my parents taught me that real power moves in silence. They instilled in me a relentless drive and an unshakable sense of self-worth. When I entered the ruthless male-dominated world of corporate acquisitions, I had to be twice as smart and work 3 times as hard as anyone else in the room. By the time I turned 30, I had built a holding company that specialized in buying failing luxury assets, restructuring their management, and turning them into highly profitable enterprises. I dealt in boutique hotels, exclusive country clubs, and high-end transportation services. My holding company was quietly generating millions of dollars in revenue while I wore unassuming clothes and drove a reliable 5-year-old sedan. I learned early on that wealth whispers while insecurity screams. When I met Andre 6 years ago, I was still building my foundation. He was a middle manager at a logistics company, handsome, charming, and seemingly grounded. I loved that he did not care about flashy things, or so I thought. I kept my financial successes private back then, simply because I wanted a relationship built on genuine connection, not bank account balances. But then I met his family, and my decision for privacy morphed into a strategy for survival. Andre comes from a blended family that places an exhausting amount of value on appearances. His parents, Yvonne and Calvin, are obsessed with projecting an image of generational wealth that they do not actually possess. They leased luxury cars they could barely afford and hosted dinner parties designed solely to impress fellow church members and country club acquaintances. But the true epicenter of their toxic dynamic was Lauren, Andre's white stepsister from Calvin's second marriage. Lauren was 32 years old, proudly unemployed, and completely funded by Calvin's dwindling savings. She called herself a luxury lifestyle influencer, which effectively meant she spent her days curating a fake life on social media while looking down her nose at anyone she deemed beneath her aesthetic standards. From the moment I was introduced to the family, Lauren made it her personal mission to remind me of my place. Because I did not wear clothes covered in designer logos and rarely spoke about my career, she immediately categorized me as a struggling lower-class addition to their prestigious family tree. During our early family gatherings, whenever someone asked what I did for a living, I would give my standard humble answer. I work in the hospitality industry, managing assets and consulting on properties. Lauren would always let out a little patronizing sigh. "Oh, so you handle customer service for motels," she would say, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "That must be so draining. I hope the tips are decent." The first time she said it, I looked to Andre expecting him to correct her or at least defend my dignity. Instead, he just took a sip of his wine and looked away, desperate to avoid any conflict that might disrupt his parents' perfectly curated dinner table. Later, when I confronted him in the car ride home, he simply patted my hand and told me to let it go. "You know how Lauren is," he said smoothly. "She is just sensitive about her own career right now. Just ignore her, Zuri. Be the bigger person. Do not rock the boat." So I stopped rocking the boat. In fact, I let them build a whole fleet of misconceptions about me. As my business exploded and my net worth climbed into the 8 figures, I continued to let Lauren offer me her discarded handbags out of pity. I continued to let Yvonne give me unsolicited advice on how to stretch a grocery budget. I sat quietly at their extravagant Sunday dinners, sipping cheap wine out of expensive crystal glasses, while my phone buzzed in my pocket with notifications of massive wire transfers and international acquisition approvals. Keeping my wealth a secret became a source of quiet empowerment. While Lauren exhausted herself trying to convince the internet that she was a member of the elite, I was actively buying the very establishments she begged for free collaborations from. It was a fascinating sociological experiment watching my husband and his family treat me like a second-class citizen simply because I did not flash my money in their faces. They operated under the assumption that because I was a dark-skinned African-American woman who did not loudly broadcast her achievements, I must be struggling to keep my head above water. What none of them knew, not even my husband, was that my holding company was in the final stages of closing the biggest deal of my career. For months, I had been negotiating the total acquisition of Oceanic Apex, one of the most exclusive and profitable yacht charter fleets operating in the Western Hemisphere. I spent my days analyzing maritime law, reviewing vessel maintenance logs, and securing a multi-million-dollar buyout that would make me the sole owner of 7 luxury superyachts. I was preparing to step into a completely new echelon of wealth and influence. Meanwhile, I would come home to Andre complaining about how much money he had to spend on his family's upcoming events, constantly reminding me that we needed to watch our budget because my hospitality salary was not enough to support his lifestyle goals. I would simply nod, agree to be mindful of my spending, and retreat to my home office to review the final purchase agreements for a maritime empire. I knew the truth always had a way of revealing itself, but I never could have predicted the spectacular, devastating way my two worlds were about to collide, fueled by Lauren's relentless entitlement and my husband's ultimate betrayal. To understand how we reached the point of absolute betrayal, you have to understand the suffocating ecosystem of my marriage. Andre was a man whose entire personality revolved around maintaining a frictionless existence. As a corporate manager, he navigated our marriage the exact same way he navigated his boardrooms. He avoided conflict at all costs, deflected accountability, and perpetually appeased the loudest person in the room. Unfortunately for me, the loudest person was never his wife. It was always his family. Andre's parents, Yvonne and Calvin, operated on a bizarre frequency of overcompensation. Decades ago, Calvin had briefly separated from Yvonne to enter a highly turbulent second marriage with a wealthy white woman. That union produced no children of their own, but it did bring his ex-wife's daughter Lauren into Calvin's life. When Calvin and Yvonne eventually reconciled and remarried, they inexplicably kept Lauren as the permanent coddled centerpiece of their blended family. Calvin harbored immense guilt over the messy divorce years, and Yvonne, desperate to project the image of a progressive, forgiving matriarch, bent over backward to accommodate her husband's white stepdaughter. Enter Lauren. At 32 years old, she was a walking embodiment of unearned privilege. She had unfettered access to her biological mother's trust fund, which she happily supplemented with Calvin's guilt money whenever she overdrew her accounts. Lauren rebranded this endless stream of familial subsidies as being a self-made luxury lifestyle influencer. Her daily routine consisted of unboxing designer bags she did not earn, posting highly filtered photos from private beach clubs she did not hold memberships to, and dropping exhausting racial microaggressions masked as high fashion critique. She loved to preach to her followers about manifesting wealth and working hard, completely ignoring the fact that Calvin was paying her luxury apartment rent. From the moment I was introduced to the family, Lauren made it her personal mission to remind me of my place. Because I did not wear clothing plastered in designer logos, and rarely spoke about my career, she immediately categorized me as a struggling lower-class addition to their prestigious family tree. She loved to corner me at family events to offer her unwanted guidance. She would examine my tailored but unbranded blazers and suggest I try looking a bit more elevated for family photos. She frequently described my natural hair or my tasteful jewelry as being a bit too urban for certain upscale venues. I remember one specific Sunday dinner where she handed me her phone, instructing me to take a dozen photos of her posing by Calvin's pool. When I handed the phone back, she inspected the images, sighed heavily, and said, "I suppose this is the best I can expect from someone who lacks an eye for luxury aesthetics. It is so brave how you just embrace being average, Zuri. My sponsors would literally drop me if I let my standards slip to your level." The true betrayal did not come from Lauren, it came from Andre. Every time Lauren dropped one of her thinly veiled insults, Andre would suddenly find the bottom of his glass incredibly fascinating. He would stare at his food completely mute while his stepsister took verbal shots at my dignity. Yvonne and Calvin would simply chuckle nervously, eager to quickly change the subject to whatever new wellness retreat Lauren was promoting. If I brought it up in the privacy of our home, the gaslighting from my husband was immediate and suffocating. He would tell me I was reading too much into things. He would insist Lauren was just culturally unaware and that it was my job as the stronger, older woman to educate her with grace. He weaponized my resilience against me. Because I was independent and capable, Andre decided I did not require his protection. He expected me to absorb the blows so he could enjoy his Sunday dinners in peace. "You need to stop being so defensive, Zuri," he told me, after one particularly grueling family gathering. "She is my sister. My parents just want everyone to get along. If you just nod and smile, it makes my life so much easier. Why do you always have to make things so difficult?" Our marriage became an emotional vacuum, where my self-respect was routinely sacrificed on the altar of his family's comfort. Andre did not love me for my mind or my spirit. He loved me because I provided a stable, quiet foundation that allowed him to focus all his energy on pleasing Yvonne, Calvin, and Lauren. I was the reliable background character in the movie of his life. This dynamic created a toxic environment where disrespect was not just tolerated, it was rewarded. Lauren learned very quickly that she could say or do absolutely anything to me without facing a single consequence from her father, her stepmother, or her brother. She viewed my silence as weakness. She viewed my modest lifestyle as proof of my inferiority. She grew bolder with every passing month, convinced that I was completely powerless to stop her relentless campaign of belittlement. I let them believe it. I swallowed the insults and smiled through the condescension, using the anger as fuel for my true ambitions. While they were busy judging my sensible shoes and plain tote bags, I was busy executing hostile takeovers of companies worth more than their entire family lineage combined. I knew that fighting back with words would only feed their narrative that I was an angry, unreasonable woman. I preferred to let my actions do the talking, and my actions were currently finalizing the paperwork to buy the very industry they used to define their social status. The climax of this toxic dynamic always occurred around Yvonne's mahogany dining table. That particular Sunday evening was a masterclass in orchestrated disrespect. Yvonne had spent the entire afternoon preparing a lavish spread, trying desperately to mimic a lifestyle magazine layout. The crystal water goblets caught the light from the chandelier, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lauren sat directly across from me, aggressively pushing an artisanal salad around her plate while holding court. For the first 20 minutes, we were subjected to a monologue about her latest brand partnership. She tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder, boasting about her elite social media status, and how a luxury skincare line had just deemed her the perfect face for their new demographic. She spoke of her followers as if she were a cult leader, dropping buzzwords about manifestation and high vibrational living. Andre sat to my right, nodding along, as if his stepsister were delivering a groundbreaking keynote address. Calvin and Yvonne hung on her every word, their faces glowing with unearned pride. When Lauren finally exhausted the topic of her own brilliance, her eyes darted across the table and locked onto me. I recognized that look instantly. It was the predatory gaze of someone who needed to tear another woman down to sustain her own artificial high. So Zuri Lauren began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. How are things going with that little hospitality job of yours? You have been looking incredibly exhausted lately. I really hope they are paying you overtime for whatever it is you do. I placed my fork down on my plate, keeping my posture perfectly straight. Things are progressing exactly as planned, I replied evenly. I am overseeing a rather large asset transition at the moment. Lauren let out a sharp, breathy laugh. Right, an asset transition. That is a very fancy way of saying you are rebooking conference rooms and dealing with angry tourists. I was actually telling my followers just yesterday how vital it is to practice gratitude for the service industry. I mean, someone has to coordinate the housekeeping staff. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her gaze sweeping over my face. You know, you really should let me send you some of my discarded PR packages. A high-quality brightening serum does absolute wonders for dark skin that has lost its glow from the daily grind. You really do not want the stress of a basic corporate job to age you before your time. It is just a shame you do not have the aesthetic flexibility to monetize your life the way I do. The silence that followed her statement was heavy and absolute. The racial microaggression was not even thinly veiled. It was sitting right there on the table next to the mashed potatoes. I slowly turned my head to look at my husband. This was the moment. This was the line in the sand where a man who loved his wife would intervene, set a boundary, and demand respect. Instead, Andre picked up his steak knife. I watched his hands. I listened to the distinct rhythmic scraping of the serrated edge against his porcelain plate. He cut a piece of meat, chewed it methodically, and then reached for his wine glass. He did not look at Lauren. He did not look at me. He simply swallowed his food and prioritized his own comfort over my dignity. Calvin cleared his throat and immediately asked Andre about the upcoming football season. Yvonne offered Lauren another serving of asparagus, praising her clear complexion. The conversation moved on seamlessly. I was entirely invisible to the people who were supposed to be my family. 2 hours later, the doors of Andre's car shut, sealing us inside the quiet interior for the drive home. The streetlights washed over his face as he gripped the steering wheel. The silence between us was suffocating, but Andre could never handle the weight of his own cowardice for long. You had a massive attitude during dessert, Zuri, he said, his voice laced with annoyance rather than apology. Please tell me you are not still dwelling on what Lauren said at the table. I kept my eyes fixed on the passing traffic. She insulted my career, my appearance, and my race in front of your parents, Andre, and you sat there eating your dinner. He let out a loud, exasperated sigh, slapping his hand against the steering wheel. She is just sensitive right now because her engagement metrics are down. You always take everything so personally. She was offering you free skincare, Zuri. Just ignore her. Do not make it a thing and ruin the weekend for my parents. You are the older, more grounded woman. Be the bigger person and let it go. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or waste my breath explaining basic respect to a man who was committed to misunderstanding me. Arguments require a desire for resolution, and I had absolutely no desire to resolve anything with Andre anymore. My marriage was dead, and he was the one who had quietly suffocated it. Instead of fighting, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the car. While Andre continued to ramble about how hard his father worked to keep the blended family united, I opened a secure email portal. I tapped on a 300-page encrypted PDF document. It was the final binding purchase agreement for Oceanic Apex. I scrolled through the legalese, my eyes tracing the details of the maritime assets I was about to acquire. 7 magnificent state-of-the-art superyachts, a highly trained global staff, a brand synonymous with the absolute pinnacle of ultra-luxury travel. The wire transfers were queued. The escrow accounts were fully funded. In exactly 4 days, my signature would finalize a multi-million-dollar acquisition that would send shockwaves through the luxury market. Andre glanced over at the glowing screen. Checking emails for the hotel managers on a Sunday night, he muttered, shaking his head. You really need to set boundaries at that job, Zuri. They are working you into the ground for pennies. I locked my phone screen, plunging my side of the car back into darkness. Yes, I replied, my voice perfectly smooth. I am setting new boundaries starting this week. The transition is almost complete. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the passenger window and smiled. Lauren thought she was the ultimate authority on high-end living because she unboxed free lip gloss on the internet. Andre thought I was a powerless, overworked employee desperate for his family's acceptance. They had absolutely no idea that they were currently sharing breathing room with a woman who was days away from owning the most exclusive yacht charter fleet in the hemisphere. The storm was coming, and I was going to be the one steering the ship. 2 weeks later, the ink on the final purchase agreements for Oceanic Apex had officially dried. I was no longer just a negotiator reviewing financial documents in the dark passenger seat of my husband's car. I was the undisputed legal owner of a massive maritime empire. The transition of power happened in absolute secrecy, masked behind the heavy doors of corporate law firms and ironclad non-disclosure agreements. My daily routine remained completely untouched. I still woke up early, still dressed in my elegant but unbranded attire, and still drank my morning coffee in silence, while Andre complained about his mundane office politics. The only difference was the deep, unshakable peace radiating in my chest. I had secured my throne, and I was simply waiting for the perfect moment to claim it. That moment began to take shape during another mandatory family gathering. Yvonne had summoned us all for a Sunday brunch to discuss her and Calvin's impending 40th wedding anniversary. Andre had spent the entire morning pacing our bedrooms, stressing over how we were going to afford a suitable gift. He kept suggesting we pool our money with Lauren for a weekend trip to a generic vineyard or a moderately priced golf resort. I simply agreed to whatever he proposed, packing my purse and walking out the door. I knew full well Lauren would never agree to share the spotlight, nor would she ever settle for a moderately priced anything when she could use other people's money to fund her delusions of grandeur. We gathered in Yvonne's overly decorated sunroom, a space stuffed with faux antique furniture that perfectly mirrored the family's obsession with projecting unearned status. We sat around a glass coffee table picking at dry pastries. Andre cleared his throat, leaning forward to pitch his modest anniversary ideas. Before the first syllable could even leave his lips, Lauren stood up from her velvet armchair. She tapped her manicured fingernail against her crystal mimosa glass, demanding the absolute attention of the room. "Please," Lauren said, rolling her eyes and waving a hand to dismiss him entirely. "A golf resort is so incredibly basic. Our parents deserve something extraordinary for their 40th anniversary. They deserve an experience that truly reflects the elite status of this family, something that aligns with the luxury lifestyle I have cultivated." She pulled a sleek tablet from her designer tote bag and seamlessly cast her screen to the massive smart television mounted on the living room wall. The screen flashed to life, displaying a highly produced cinematic video presentation. Sweeping drone footage showcased the vibrant Miami coastline dipping down over pristine turquoise waters. Then a magnificent gleaming superyacht cut through the waves, its brilliant white hull contrasting beautifully against the deep blue ocean. My heart executed a perfect silent stop inside my chest. I recognized that vessel instantly. It was the Sapphire Horizon, a 150-foot masterpiece of maritime engineering featuring a cascading aft deck, a glass-bottom jacuzzi, and a helipad. More importantly, it was the crown jewel of the Oceanic Apex fleet. It was my ship. Lauren prattled on, her voice climbing an octave with self-importance as she claimed she had leveraged her massive influencer network to secure the vessel. "I have arranged the ultimate luxury experience," she beamed, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder and gesturing dramatically toward the television. "We are doing a week-long private charter in Miami. 7 days sailing the crystal-clear waters of the Florida Keys and the Bahamas. We will have a private executive chef, a full white-glove service crew, and sunset dinners on the upper deck. I wanted to give you the gift of a lifetime, Mom and Dad, because you deserve to experience how the other half lives." The reaction in the room was immediate and nauseating. Yvonne burst into theatrical tears, rushing across the carpet to pull her stepdaughter into a suffocating embrace. She praised Lauren as her beautiful, generous girl, completely ignoring the fact that Lauren had not held a paying job in her entire adult life. Calvin puffed out his chest, declaring Lauren the absolute pride of the family and boasting about her incredible industry connections. Andre just slumped back in his chair. He looked incredibly relieved that he did not have to plan anything, entirely oblivious to the financial trap Lauren was actively laying down beneath his feet. Lauren basked in the glowing adoration for several minutes, soaking up the praise like a sponge. Then she turned her attention to the aesthetic requirements of her so-called generous gift. Now, because this trip is going to be heavily documented for my brand partnerships, Lauren said, pacing the room like a creative director addressing her subordinates. We are going to have a very strict visual aesthetic. I am talking neutral tones, effortless resort wear, and high-end yachting attire. I have a very specific vision for my content, and I need everyone to match the vibe perfectly. She stopped pacing and planted herself directly in front of me. Her eyes slowly scanned up and down my tailored minimalist navy wrap dress. She tilted her head, offering a look of profound, weaponized pity. Zuri, I know you usually stick to your practical, budget-friendly office clothes, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. But that simply is not going to work for the cameras on a super yacht. We cannot have you walking around the deck looking like a corporate receptionist who got lost on her lunch break. My sponsors expect a cohesive, affluent vibe. Andre shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but remained completely silent, staring intently at his plate of pastries. But do not worry. Lauren continued, placing a patronizing hand on my shoulder. I will send you a mood board and some links to affordable fast fashion dupes that look decent from a distance. If you need to borrow a cover-up that does not scream budget aisle, just let me know. I want you to feel somewhat comfortable among us, even if this level of luxury is completely outside your comfort zone. The sheer concentrated irony of the moment tasted like fine-aged wine on my tongue. This unemployed influencer was lecturing me about the aesthetic requirements of a vessel that I legally owned. She was offering me cheap clothing recommendations so I would not ruin the background of photos taken on my own multi-million-dollar property. I looked at Andre again, but he was busy swirling the orange juice in his glass, completely ignoring his sister's blatant, racially coded disrespect. I did not react with anger. I did not defend my wardrobe or my dignity. Instead, I smiled. Not a tight, polite smile, but a genuine, radiant expression of pure predatory amusement. Thank you, Lauren, I said softly, looking her dead in the eye with unwavering confidence. I promise you my wardrobe will be perfectly suited for the owner's deck. You will not have to worry about my presence disrupting your brand in the slightest. Lauren missed the nuance entirely. She took my calm compliance as a total victory, assuming I had bowed to her superior social standing. She clapped her hands together, thrilled by her own perceived dominance. Perfect, she chirped, turning back to bask in Yvonne and Calvin's adoring gazes. I am so glad we are all on the same page. This is going to be the most exclusive, high-class week of our lives. I picked up my coffee cup, taking a slow sip as I watched the promotional video of my yacht loop on their television screen. Lauren thought she was granting us access to an exclusive world. She had absolutely no idea that she was walking directly onto my chessboard, and the game had already begun. The grand illusion of family unity lasted exactly 3 days before the financial squeeze began. On Tuesday morning, my phone chimed with a notification from our family group chat. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing the final transition protocols for my new maritime staff, when Lauren sent a highly stylized document to the group. It was wrapped in elegant minimalist graphics, with a soft beige color palette, looking less like a bill and more like a digital invitation to an exclusive gala. The file was simply titled Anniversary Voyage Contributions. I opened the document, took a sip of my black coffee, and felt a genuine bubbling laugh rise in my chest. Lauren had meticulously itemized the cost of the upcoming week on the Sapphire Horizon. She had broken down the expenses into pristine little categories, covering fuel surcharges, port fees, daily provisions, and cabin rates. It was a masterpiece of absolute fiction. As the literal owner of the management company that dictated the operating costs for that exact vessel, I knew the baseline numbers down to the cent. I knew what it cost to idle the engines in the Miami harbor. I knew the wholesale price of the champagne stocked in the galley, and I certainly knew the going rate for every single bed on board. Lauren was billing Andre and me an astronomical $45,000 for a lower deck twin cabin. To put her sheer audacity into perspective, the lower deck twin cabins on the Sapphire Horizon were traditionally utilized for overflow guests, personal assistants, or nannies traveling with wealthy families. They were beautifully appointed, of course, but they lacked the ocean view balconies, the expansive square footage, and the soaking tubs featured in the upper deck VIP suites. The actual market rate for that specific cabin, even during peak charter season, was a fraction of what Lauren had typed onto her elegant little PDF. I set my coffee mug down and quickly ran the mental math. I calculated the overall weekly charter cost of the vessel. I subtracted the enormous sum Lauren was undoubtedly extracting from Calvin and Yvonne under the guise of shared expenses. Then I factored in the massive $45,000 penalty she was attempting to extort from her stepbrother and his wife. The conclusion was brilliantly clear and entirely shameless. Lauren was completely subsidizing her own trip. Furthermore, she was generating enough surplus cash from our forced contributions to cover the luxury suites for whatever freeloading influencer friends she planned to bring along as her personal photographers. She was running a high-end scam on her own flesh and blood to fund her content creation, and she expected me to blindly foot the bill. She operated under the deeply arrogant assumption that because I was a working-class African-American woman with a quiet job, I lacked the financial literacy to recognize when I was being robbed. Before I could even process how I wanted to handle the group chat, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a private message directly from Lauren. She could not resist the urge to twist the knife, eager to flex her perceived superiority in a one-on-one setting where she did not have to play the role of the sweet, generous daughter. I opened the message. It read exactly like a textbook example of passive-aggressive psychological warfare. "I know the invoice looks a bit steep for someone on a basic hospitality budget," Lauren wrote, adding a deeply patronizing heart emoji at the end of the sentence. "But you have to consider this an investment in your lifestyle. You need to pay your dues to roll with us on this level. The Yacht Charter Company requires premium non-refundable deposits up front to maintain their high-end vibe and keep the clientele exclusive. I know this is a massive stretch for you, Zuri, so if you need me to set up a discreet payment plan so you do not stress Andre out with your financial limitations, just let me know. You have to pay to play in our world, but I am willing to help you manage it." I read the text twice, marveling at the staggering weight of her entitlement. She was offering me a payment plan to rent a room on my own ship. She was telling me about the strict exclusive requirements of a charter company that currently had my name printed on their ultimate deed of ownership. She was trying to frame her extortion as a charitable act, positioning herself as the gatekeeper to a world she believed I was desperate to enter. Lauren needed me to feel small. She needed me to feel the crushing weight of my supposed inadequacy because her entire sense of self-worth was built on feeling superior to the black woman her brother had married. She wanted me to panic, to feel the shame of not being able to effortlessly afford the lifestyle she was pretending to provide. She wanted me to apologize for my financial limitations and beg her for an extension, placing me permanently in her debt. I did not feel small. I felt a cold, sharp wave of predatory amusement wash over my entire body. I clicked back over to her elegant invoice and zoomed in on the payment instructions at the very bottom of the page. Lauren had provided routing details for a direct wire transfer, claiming she had set up a dedicated account solely for the anniversary trip to keep things organized. I recognized the routing number instantly. It was not a personal account. Lauren was not collecting the money directly because she did not have the capital to front the massive security deposit required to hold the yacht. Instead, she had provided the direct payment portal for the Oceanic Apex corporate escrow account. She was instructing her family to pay the yacht company directly, masking the corporate routing number as her own private vacation fund. She had likely signed a baseline contract requiring a massive initial deposit by the end of the week, and she was using our money to secure the reservation before her own lack of funds could be exposed. This meant that if I wired the $45,000 she was demanding, the money would not go into Lauren's manicured hands. It would go directly into the corporate accounts of my own holding company. I would literally be paying myself. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, the cool marble pressing against my spine. A lesser woman would have immediately sent a fiery text message exposing the math. A more impulsive person would have called Yvonne and Calvin to reveal that their precious daughter was actively scamming them out of their retirement savings to fund a week of free champagne for her internet friends. But I was not impulsive, and I had absolutely no desire to save Andre's family from their own toxic creation. Yvonne and Calvin had spent years enabling Lauren's delusions. They had coddled her arrogance and turned a blind eye to her relentless disrespect toward me. They had built this monster and now they were going to pay the price for it. I looked at Lauren's private message again. You have to pay to play in our world. She was absolutely right about one thing. There was a steep price of admission for this level of luxury, and someone was going to have to pay the dues. I decided in that quiet, sunlit kitchen that I was going to let Lauren dig her own grave. I was going to let her believe she had successfully extorted me. I was going to let her parade around that dock in Miami completely convinced that she was the supreme authority of the family right up until the very moment I dropped the hammer and shattered her entire reality. I locked my phone and set it down next to my coffee. The trap was set and the bait was irresistible. Now I just needed to see exactly how far my husband was willing to go to force me into his sister's jaws. Andre walked through the front door just after 6 o'clock, tossing his briefcase onto the entryway bench with an exhausted sigh. He loosened his tie, walked into the kitchen, and immediately reached for the bottle of wine sitting on the counter. He did not ask about my day. He did not kiss my cheek. He just poured a glass and took a long sip, entirely focused on his own daily fatigue. I remained seated at the kitchen island, Lauren's digital invoice pulled up on my laptop screen. I waited for him to take a second sip before I turned the laptop around to face him. Have you seen the anniversary contribution breakdown your sister sent to the group chat? I asked, keeping my voice entirely neutral. Andre glanced at the screen, his shoulders immediately tensing. He rubbed his eyes clearly, preparing for a battle he had hoped to avoid. Yes, I saw it at the office, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. It is a bit higher than I anticipated, but it is a luxury superyacht, Zuri. We knew it was going to be an expensive trip. We just need to tighten our belts for a few months. It is for my parents. I tapped the screen, pointing directly at the bottom line. Andre, she is asking us for $45,000. That is not just a high price tag. That is blatant extortion. She has assigned us a lower deck twin cabin. Do you understand what that means in the maritime charter industry? That is overflow crew housing. The market rate for that specific cabin does not even approach a third of what she is demanding from us. Andre set his wine glass down harder than necessary. The sharp clink echoed in the quiet kitchen. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of defensive anger. Why do you always have to analyze everything like it is a corporate audit? He snapped. She is handling the logistics. She has the connections. She is doing us a favor by organizing the entire thing. She is not doing us a favor, I countered, maintaining my icy composure. I did the math, Andre. I looked at the overall charter costs for a vessel of this class. Lauren is overcharging us to subsidize the entire trip. She is using our $45,000 to cover the security deposit because she does not have the capital herself. She is making us pay for her luxury suite, and she is likely using the surplus to fund free rides for whatever social media friends she plans to bring along. Your sister is running a scam to fund her lifestyle brand, and she expects us to foot the bill. The color drained from Andre's face not because he realized I was right, but because I had dared to articulate the ugly truth about his precious family dynamic. His reaction was swift, predictable, and deeply pathetic. He did not defend me. He did not question his sister's numbers. Instead, he went on the offensive, attacking the easiest target available. You are unbelievable, Zuri, he shouted, throwing his hands in the air. You are so deeply insecure about Lauren that you have to invent these ridiculous conspiracy theories just to tear her down. She is trying to give my parents the 40th anniversary trip of a lifetime, and all you can do is sit here and complain about the cost, because you are too cheap to celebrate them properly. I sat perfectly still, letting his words hit the air and dissipate like cheap smoke. I am not being cheap, Andre. I am refusing to be robbed by a woman who has not worked a day in her life. Well, maybe if your little hospitality job paid better, you would not be so intimidated by the price tag. He fired back a cruel sneer, twisting his features. This is how wealthy people vacation, Zuri. I know you do not understand that because of how you grew up, but this is the standard. I will pull the money from my savings if I have to. I will take out a personal loan. I do not care what it takes. You are not going to ruin this milestone for my parents just because you have a petty vendetta against my sister. If you cannot afford to run in these circles, just say so, but do not you dare accuse my sister of stealing. He stared at me, breathing heavily, chest heaving with the effort of defending the very people who used him as a doormat. It was a fascinating, tragic display of misplaced loyalty. He was willing to plunge himself into financial debt to finance Lauren's delusions of grandeur, and he was willing to verbally degrade his own wife to justify it. In that exact moment, watching him stand in our kitchen with absolute contempt in his eyes, the final lingering thread of my marriage cleanly snapped. There was no sadness. There was no heartbreak. There was only the clinical realization that this man was a liability and it was time to cut my losses. But a good CEO never tips her hand before the deal is closed. If I fought him, he would call his parents and paint me as the jealous, uncooperative wife. I needed him to believe he had won. I needed them all to walk confidently onto that dock in Miami, utterly convinced of their own supremacy. I let a calculated look of defeat wash over my face. I looked down at my hands, took a slow, deep breath, and let it out as a shaky sigh. "You are right," I said softly, my voice laced with fake resignation. "I am sorry. I let my anxiety over the budget get the better of me. This is your parents' 40th anniversary. It is a massive milestone, and I should not be making it about the money." Andre's posture instantly relaxed. The anger bled out of his face, replaced by that familiar patronizing smugness he wore whenever he successfully bullied me into submission. He walked around the island and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, giving it a condescending squeeze. "I know it is a lot of money, Zuri," he said, his tone shifting back to the benevolent peacemaker. "But this is what family does. We step up. Thank you for being reasonable. Do you want me to transfer some funds from my account to help you cover your half?" "No," I replied, offering him a tight, compliant smile. "I have some savings tucked away. I can handle the transfer. I will send the full 45,000 tonight so Lauren can secure the reservation." Andre beamed at me, completely oblivious to the trap snapping shut around his ankles. He kissed the top of my head, grabbed his wine glass, and walked into the living room to turn on the television, entirely satisfied that he had restored the natural order of his universe. I turned back to my laptop. I pulled up Lauren's elegant invoice and highlighted the payment routing information at the bottom of the page. I opened a secure encrypted tab to my personal banking portal, a high-yield account that held just a fraction of my liquid assets. I initiated a wire transfer for exactly $45,000. I pasted the routing number Lauren had provided. The banking system processed the digits and the verified recipient name popped up on my screen. It did not say Lauren. It read Oceanic Apex Escrow Account. I hovered my cursor over the submit button. My husband thought he had just forced me to empty my meager savings to appease his entitled stepsister. He thought he had successfully put me in my place. He had absolutely no idea that I was wiring those funds directly into the corporate holding account of my own acquisition firm. I was quite literally paying myself to tolerate his family's disrespect. I clicked submit. The screen flashed a green confirmation checkmark. The money was sent. The reservation was secured. Lauren now had the deposit she needed to book the Sapphire Horizon, and she believed she had successfully asserted her dominance over the quiet working-class wife. I closed my laptop and listened to the sound of a sports game echoing from the living room television. Let them have their victory tonight. Let Lauren brag to her followers about her elite yachting lifestyle. Let Andre sleep soundly thinking he had protected his family's honor. They were happily marching toward their own destruction, funding a vacation on a vessel that belonged entirely to me. The stage was set for Miami, and I was going to ensure that their eventual awakening would be the most spectacular, devastating reality check of their lives. Exactly. 48 hours after that wire transfer cleared, I sat in a high-rise boardroom overlooking the downtown skyline. The polished oak table was covered in thick stacks of legal documents, maritime deeds, and operational transfer agreements. Across from me sat the former board of directors for Oceanic Apex, a group of seasoned businessmen who looked at me with a mixture of profound respect and cautious awe. My lead counsel handed me a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. I leaned forward, signed my name on the final dotted line, and pushed the leather-bound folio across the table. The room erupted in polite, measured applause. Hands were shaken, congratulations were murmured, and champagne was poured. I took a single sip, letting the crisp, dry vintage wash over my tongue. It was done. The ink was dry. My boutique acquisitions firm was now the sole owner of a maritime empire. The transition was absolute and legally binding. I held the supreme deed to the Sapphire Horizon, along with 6 other state-of-the-art superyachts, currently docked in international waters. I had officially stepped out of the shadows of boutique asset management and vaulted into the stratosphere of ultra-luxury maritime hospitality. I was no longer just a smart investor. I was a titan of the industry. When I walked out of that glass-walled building and stepped into the humid afternoon air, the world felt entirely different. The sheer gravity of what I had just accomplished settled into my bones. My holding company now controlled a global staff of over 500 employees, including master captains, Michelin-starred private chefs, and elite marine engineers. I possessed a fleet that catered exclusively to royalty tech billionaires and international dignitaries. My net worth had just skyrocketed past a threshold that most people could not even comprehend, let alone achieve. I had built a fortress of wealth that no one could ever dismantle. Yet as my phone buzzed in my pocket, the notifications were a jarring reminder of the bizarre double life I was living. I had emails from my new maritime chief of operations detailing international fuel logistics and offshore accounts. Right beneath them was a text message from Andre. He was complaining that I had forgotten to buy his specific brand of protein powder at the grocery store, reminding me to be more mindful of his morning routine. The juxtaposition was almost poetic. My husband was agonizing over a $20 grocery run while I was authorizing millions of dollars in maritime operational budgets. I replied to Andre with a simple apology and a promise to pick it up on my way home. I felt no anger in that moment. The staggering reality of my new power had completely insulated me from the petty, exhausting grievances of my marriage. I felt untouchable. As I drove my unassuming sedan through the city traffic, my mind shifted toward the upcoming Miami trip. Lauren had successfully manipulated the family into funding her aesthetic fantasies. She had squeezed $45,000 out of my accounts, fully convinced she had put me in my place. The obvious immediate reaction would be to crush her. I had the power to freeze her reservation, cancel the charter, and leave her humiliated on the docks. I could expose her financial scam to Yvonne and Calvin, tearing down the entire illusion of the generous, wealthy influencer daughter. But true power does not need to be vindictive to be effective. True power can afford to be magnanimous. I thought about Yvonne and Calvin. Yes, they enabled Lauren to a toxic degree. Yes, they had routinely failed to defend me or acknowledge my worth. But 40 years of marriage was a significant milestone. They were older, entering the twilight of their lives, and despite their deep flaws, they were still my husband's parents. They had worked hard in their own right, even if their current obsession with social climbing clouded their judgment. I decided in that quiet car ride that I was going to rise completely above the petty drama. I was not going to ruin their anniversary trip. Instead, I was going to elevate it beyond their wildest comprehension. I was going to use my new, limitless resources to show them what actual, unbothered grace looked like. I wanted to prove that my success was not a weapon, but a shield that could cover all of us. I pulled my car into my driveway, turned off the engine, and dialed the direct line to Captain Sterling. He was the senior commanding officer of the Sapphire Horizon, a highly respected maritime veteran who was now my direct employee. He answered on the second ring. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can the crew assist you today?" I smiled, listening to the crisp, professional respect in his voice. Good afternoon, Captain. We have a charter launching from Miami in a few weeks. The reservation is under my husband's family name, though it was booked by a woman named Lauren. I need you to pull that manifest. I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on his end of the line. Yes, ma'am. I have the itinerary right here. We are prepping the vessel for a 7-day Bahamian route. Excellent, I replied. I am going to be making some significant adjustments to the interior assignments and the service protocols for this specific voyage. First, I want you to upgrade Yvonne and Calvin to the primary master suite. I know Lauren likely reserved it for herself, but you will move her belongings to one of the standard mid-deck rooms. The master suite features the panoramic ocean views and the private soaking tub, and that is strictly for the anniversary couple. Understood perfectly, ma'am, the captain said, his tone unwavering. Second, I continued leaning back against the leather seat of my car. I want the culinary budget completely overhauled. I want the finest cuts of Wagyu imported caviar and top-tier vintage champagne stocked in the galley. You will spare absolutely no expense for the dining experiences. I want a private 5-course catered dinner set up on the upper deck for the night of their actual anniversary. I want custom floral arrangements in every single cabin matching Yvonne's favorite color palette of blush and gold. And I want the entire crew to treat them with the utmost uncompromising white glove service from the exact second they step onto the dock. Consider it done, the captain assured me. Will you and your husband be requiring the secondary VIP suite? Yes. Put Andre and me in the secondary suite. But I need you to keep my ownership entirely discreet for now. My family does not know about the acquisition, and I want this to be a massive surprise once we set sail. Let Lauren believe she is still the one calling the shots during the boarding process. Let her enjoy her moment of playing the generous host. Once we are out on the open water, and they see the magnitude of the upgrades, I will reveal the truth. I want to treat my in-laws to an experience they could never have accessed otherwise. It will be a spectacular surprise, ma'am. The crew and I look forward to welcoming you aboard. I ended the call and stepped out of my car, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. I was going to shower my in-laws in so much genuine, breathtaking luxury that Lauren's cheap, manipulative little scam would be entirely overshadowed. I was going to give Andre the ultimate gift, taking care of his parents in a way he could never afford to do himself. I was choosing to be the bigger person. I was choosing family unity over ego, hoping that this grand gesture would finally prove my worth to a family that had spent years trying to diminish me. I walked through my front door, greeted by the smell of dinner Andre had hastily thrown together. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, completely ignorant of the fact that his wife had just orchestrated the most magnificent vacation of his life. When he looked up and gave me a tired, distracted smile, I felt a surge of genuine affection for him. I hoped that this grand gesture would finally snap him out of his sister's toxic orbit. I thought that by showering them with grace, I could finally earn the respect I had been quietly denied for years. I wanted to believe that overwhelming generosity could heal the fractures in my marriage. I wanted to believe that my success could be a bridge rather than a barrier. I had absolutely no idea that my grace was about to be met with the ultimate unforgivable betrayal. Thursday evening arrived with a quiet hum of anticipation in our house. 2 days remained before our scheduled flight to Miami. I was in our master bedroom, standing over my open suitcase, meticulously folding a collection of silk resort wear and crisp linen trousers. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine sense of excitement regarding a family event. I had spent the past 48 hours visualizing the look of absolute shock and delight on Yvonne and Calvin's faces when Captain Sterling escorted them to the primary master suite. I had imagined the moment I would finally step out from behind the curtain of my hospitality consultant facade and reveal the truth of my success. I believed, perhaps naively, that providing an unparalleled luxury experience would finally bridge the gap between us. I thought overwhelming generosity could wash away years of deeply rooted disrespect. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, pulling me out of my optimistic daydream. It was a notification from our family group chat. I walked over, picked up the device, and saw that Lauren had just dropped a massive file into the thread. The message attached was characteristically arrogant. Here is the final boarding pass, an official visual itinerary for the week. Lauren wrote. Please review the daily dress codes carefully. My photographer will be capturing content from the moment we arrive at the marina, so I need everyone arriving in cohesive, elevated travel wear. No exceptions. I unlocked my phone and tapped on the document. It was a 20-page high-resolution presentation that looked like it belonged in a fashion magazine. The cover page featured a stock photo of the sapphire horizon bathed in golden hour sunlight with the title, The Ultimate Anniversary Voyage, embossed in elegant gold lettering. I scrolled through the first few pages with a detached sense of amusement. Lauren had color-coordinated every single day of the trip. Monday was designated for neutral earth tones. Tuesday required nautical blues and crisp whites for a sunset dinner. Wednesday was an aggressive all-white requirement for an afternoon beach excursion. She had even included a strict packing list of prohibited items, which hilariously banned cargo shorts, visible sports logos, and anything she deemed unrefined. Then I reached page 14. The header read, Cabin Assignments and Boarding Manifest. I scanned the page expecting to see my name listed next to Andre's in the lower deck twin cabin I had supposedly paid for. Instead, my eyes caught on the first line. Primary Master Suite Calvin and Yvonne. VIP Ocean Suite Lauren. Lower Deck Twin Cabin A, Andre and Trent. My thumb hovered over the screen. I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. I closed my eyes, shook my head, and opened them again, assuming the glaring blue light of the screen had played a trick on my vision. I read the line a second time. I read it a third time. Andre and Trent. I rapidly scrolled down to the remaining overflow cabins, searching for my name. The list ended. I scrolled back up to the top of the document. I scoured the dietary restrictions section. I checked the airport transfer manifests. I read through every single page, every footnote, and every carefully curated paragraph. My name was completely absent from the entire 20-page document. I had been entirely erased. I stood frozen in the center of my bedroom, the phone heavy in my hand. A cold electric shock of realization paralyzed my limbs. Lauren had not simply misspelled my name or made a typographical error. This was a deliberate, calculated execution. Trent was not a family member. He was Lauren's personal yoga instructor. He was a 24-year-old man with a man bun, a manifestation podcast, and a habit of carrying raw crystals in his pockets. Lauren had started bringing him to family brunches 2 months ago, parading him around as her new spiritual guru and personal wellness coach. He was a human accessory, a prop she kept around to fetch her green juice and stretch her hamstrings for her internet followers. Lauren had systematically removed her black sister-in-law from the family vacation and replaced me with a white yoga instructor. The sheer unadulterated audacity of her action crashed over me like a physical wave. She had used my $45,000 payment to secure the reservation for the yacht. She had taken my money, deposited it, and then unilaterally decided that I was not worthy of stepping foot on the vessel my money had secured. She was actively moving her personal yoga instructor into the exact cabin I had paid for. She believed she could simply harvest my bank account and then discard me because my dark skin and working-class background did not fit the pristine, high-luxury aesthetic she was trying to project to her brand sponsors. The disrespect was so profound, so deeply rooted in entitlement and racial superiority, that it transcended simple family drama. This was a hostile eviction from my own life. I slowly lowered my phone. The quiet anticipation I had felt just moments ago curdled into a dark, freezing fury. The grace I had extended to this family evaporated into thin air, leaving nothing behind but the ruthless, razor-sharp instincts of a corporate chief executive officer. They did not want peace. They wanted submission. I turned my head and looked toward the bedroom door. The hallway was dark, but I could see the flickering blue light of the television illuminating the living room walls. Andre was sitting on the couch. He had been home for 2 hours. He was in the same group chat. His phone must have vibrated at the exact same moment mine did. I walked silently out of the bedroom and moved down the hallway, my bare feet making no sound against the hardwood floor. I stopped just outside the living room archway, concealing myself in the shadows. Andre was lounging on the sofa, a cold beer resting on the coffee table. His phone was in his hand. I watched him tap the screen. I watched the familiar glow of Lauren's PDF document illuminate his face. I stood there holding my breath, watching my husband read the exact same cabin assignments I had just read. I watched his eyes track across the screen. I watched him scroll through the entire document searching for his wife's name. I waited for the outrage. I waited for him to shoot up from the couch, dial his sister's number, and scream at her for daring to exclude his wife from a family vacation. I waited for the man I had married to finally draw a line in the sand and defend my honor. Andre reached the end of the document. He let out a long, heavy sigh. He rubbed his forehead with his free hand, looking deeply annoyed. Then he locked his phone screen, tossed the device onto the sofa cushion, and picked up his beer. He took a long sip and turned his attention back to the basketball game playing on the television screen. He did absolutely nothing. He was perfectly willing to accept my erasure. He saw that his sister had taken my money, kicked me off the guest list, and assigned him a room with her yoga instructor. And his immediate response was to simply accept it. The cowardice was so absolute, so ingrained in his character, that he would rather go on a week-long vacation with a stranger than stand up to his family and demand respect for his wife. He was probably sitting there trying to figure out the easiest way to convince me to stay home without causing a scene. The heartbreak I expected to feel never arrived. The death of my marriage did not happen with a dramatic explosion of tears and screaming. It happened in absolute silence, standing in a dark hallway, watching a weak man drink a beer. I realized in that exact moment that Andre was not a victim of his family's toxic dynamic. He was an active participant. He was the enforcer of my degradation. I turned around and walked back into the master bedroom. I looked at the open suitcase on my bed, filled with elegant resort wear, meant for a family that despised me. I calmly reached down and zipped the suitcase shut. I was no longer packing for an anniversary celebration. I was packing for war. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. The time for silent observation was over. It was time to force my husband to say the quiet part out loud. I stepped out of the bedroom, my posture straight, my voice completely devoid of emotion, and walked directly into the living room to confront the man who had just silently signed away his entire future. I stepped into the center of the living room, positioning myself directly between Andre and the television screen. The bright flashing colors of the basketball game cast shifting shadows across his face as he let out a loud, irritated groan and leaned to the side, trying to look around me. "Andre," I said, my voice carrying the steady, chilling weight of an incoming winter storm. "We need to talk about the itinerary your sister just sent to the family group chat." He shifted his gaze back to the screen, his jaw tightening. "Can it wait until halftime, Zuri? I just got home and I am exhausted. Lauren is just being Lauren with her little design projects. It is just a PDF. It is a PDF that assigns my husband to a lower-deck twin cabin with a 24-year-old yoga instructor named Trent," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "A cabin that I personally wired $45,000 to secure. A document that does not contain my name on a single-page flight manifest or dinner reservation." Did you read it, Andre? Or were you just hoping I would quietly unpack my suitcase and pretend I did not notice my own erasure? Andre finally muted the television, throwing the remote onto the coffee table with a loud clatter. He rubbed his face with both hands, adopting the posture of a man who was deeply victimized by his wife's insistence on basic respect. "Zuri, you know how she gets when she is stressed about her brand sponsorships. She probably just made a typo. Or maybe she is putting the girls in one room and the guys in another to save space. Do not blow this out of proportion before we even know the facts." A typo, I repeated, letting the sheer absurdity of his excuse hang in the quiet room. She replaced her black sister-in-law with a white man who carries a yoga mat for a living. That is not a clerical error. That is a deliberate eviction. And since you are entirely unwilling to ask the difficult questions, I will do it for you. Before he could protest, I pulled my phone from my pocket, dialed Lauren's number, and immediately put the call on speakerphone, resting the device on the glass surface of the coffee table. Andre lunged forward, his eyes wide with panic, reaching out to end the call. "Do not touch that phone," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave into a tone I usually reserved for hostile boardroom negotiations. Andre froze his hand, hovering in midair, terrified of the confrontation he could no longer avoid. The line rang twice before Lauren answered. Heavy bass music and the clinking of cocktail glasses echoed in the background. "Hey, Lauren," chirped her voice dripping with the fake enthusiasm she used for her online videos. "I am so glad you guys called. Did you see the lookbook I attached? I am literally obsessed with the neutral linen concept for Tuesday. It is going to look so gorgeous against the turquoise water." "Hello, Lauren," I said smoothly, leaning over the coffee table. "We are looking at the itinerary right now. It is certainly a detailed document. However, I noticed a rather glaring omission. My name is nowhere on the boarding manifest, and my husband is sharing a cabin with your yoga instructor. I am calling to give you the opportunity to explain where exactly I am supposed to be sleeping on this voyage." The background noise on Lauren's end seemed to muffle slightly, as if she had stepped out onto a restaurant patio. When she spoke again, the sickly sweet influencer persona was completely gone. In its place was the cold, unyielding arrogance of a woman who had never been told no in her entire 32 years of life. "Oh, Zuri." Lauren sighed, a sharp, patronizing sound that grated against my ears. "I was hoping Andre would just handle this privately with you, so we did not have to make it a whole awkward conversation. But since you are putting me on the spot, I am just going to be incredibly transparent with you." Andre sank back into the sofa cushions, burying his face in his hands. He was actively shrinking, making himself as small as possible, while his sister prepared to execute my dignity over speakerphone. "I had to make an executive decision for the sake of the trip," Lauren continued, her tone brisk and entirely remorseless. "My management team secured a massive sponsorship deal for this vacation. We are shooting highly curated content for a luxury resort wear brand. I had to submit photos of everyone coming on board, and they were very specific about the visual cohesion they require. And honestly, Zuri, you do not fit the luxury aesthetic my brand needs. Your entire look is just too corporate, too stiff, and frankly, too plain. You do not belong on this trip, Zuri. You are just not our vibe." I stared at the phone. She was explicitly telling me that my dark skin, my professional demeanor, and my failure to worship at the altar of her fake wealth made me entirely unfit to breathe the same ocean air as her and her yoga instructor. She had taken my money to rent my yacht, and she was now banning me from the premises because my blackness and my authentic grind did not match her filtered sponsored aesthetic. "You took $45,000 from my bank account to secure that cabin, Lauren," I stated, my voice dangerously calm. "Are you telling me that you accepted my money to fund your content trip, but I am not permitted to board the vessel?" Lauren let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut right through the speaker. "Oh, please. We all know Andre gave you that money from his own bonus. Stop acting like you are the one funding this family. Think of it as your contribution to Yvonne and Calvin's happiness. Trent is essential for my morning wellness content, and he actually knows how to behave around high-net-worth individuals. Just stay in town, enjoy the quiet house, and let us have a peaceful family celebration without your constant heavy energy bringing everybody down. I have to go. My spicy margarita is melting. Bye." The line clicked dead. The ensuing silence in our living room was so profound it felt physical. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone against the wall. I did not shed a single tear. I slowly picked up my device, slid it back into my pocket, and turned my gaze to the man sitting on my sofa. This was the defining moment of our entire marriage. Andre had just listened to his unemployed, entitled stepsister blatantly insult my appearance, my career, and my very presence in this family. He heard her admit to extorting us. He heard her explicitly ban his wife from a family vacation so she could bring another man to take her pictures. "Andre," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling with the sheer force of the power I was holding back. "I want you to look at me." He kept his eyes glued to the hardwood floor. His hands were clasped tightly between his knees. "Look at me," I commanded. He slowly raised his head. His eyes were wide, filled with a pathetic, desperate plea for me to magically shrink myself to swallow this monumental disrespect so he would not have to do the hard work of defending his wife. He was terrified of his parents' disappointment. He was terrified of Lauren's tantrums. He was completely unbothered by my heartbreak. "You are my husband," I stated, locking my eyes onto his. "She just stole from me, humiliated me, and uninvited me from your parents' anniversary trip because I do not fit her aesthetic. I need you to pick up that phone, call your parents, and tell them that we are pulling our funding, and neither of us will be attending this sham of a vacation." Andre swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. He looked at the blank television screen, then at the coffee table, looking everywhere except at the woman who had spent years funding his comfortable, frictionless existence. He let out a long, trembling sigh. He slumped forward, defeated by his own spectacular cowardice. "Zuri, just stay home and relax," he muttered, his voice weak and entirely void of backbone. "It is only a week. Do not make a scene and ruin my parents' trip. We will do something nice, just the two of us, when I get back. It is not a big deal. Please just let them have this." I stared at him. The man I had married, the man I had built a life with, had just looked at the smoking gun of my assassination and asked me to quietly bleed out so he would not have to mop up the mess. The betrayal was total. It was absolute. There was no misunderstanding, no miscommunication. He was actively choosing his sister's comfort over my basic human dignity. "Okay," I said. Just one single word. Soft, definitive, and final. Andre looked up, a wave of profound relief washing over his face. He actually smiled. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully managed his difficult wife and preserved his family's peace. "Thank you, baby," he breathed out, standing up to reach for me. "I promise I will make it up to you. You are the best." I took a sharp step backward, putting myself entirely out of his reach. My expression was perfectly blank, but inside the CEO had fully taken the wheel. I was no longer speaking to my husband. I was looking at a liability that needed to be aggressively liquidated. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "Pack your bags, Andre. Go to Miami. Go celebrate with your family." I turned on my heel and walked down the hallway, leaving him standing alone in the living room. He thought I was retreating to lick my wounds in private. He thought I was surrendering. He had absolutely no idea that I was walking into my office to finalize the destruction of his entire world. The oceanic apex was waiting in Miami, and the owner was about to clear the deck. I locked the door to my home office with a quiet, definitive click. The heavy mahogany door effectively severed the rest of the house from my sanctuary. Outside in the hallway, I could hear the muffled sounds of Andre dragging his designer luggage from the hall closet. He was actually packing. He was genuinely preparing to board a flight funded by my money to share a yacht with a yoga instructor while his wife was banished to the suburbs. I walked over to my desk, booted up my primary workstation, and watched the multiple monitors glow to life, displaying global market tickers and secure encrypted communications. Before my fingers could even touch the keyboard to initiate my counterstrike, my cell phone vibrated violently against the glass surface of my desk. The caller identification displayed Yvonne and Calvin. I stared at the glowing names. In any normal family dynamic, a late-night phone call from the in-laws right after a massive confrontation would signify an apology. A normal mother would be calling to reprimand her stepdaughter for her blatant disrespect. A normal father would be furious that his son was allowing his wife to be treated like a disposable wallet. But I was not dealing with a normal family. I was dealing with a deeply entrenched cult of personality where Lauren was the untouchable deity. I swiped the green button accepting the call and placed the phone on speaker in the center of my desk. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, folded my hands in my lap, and waited for the incoming barrage. "Zuri," Yvonne began, her voice quivering with a manufactured, breathless indignation. "I just got off the phone with Lauren. She is absolutely inconsolable. She is crying so hard she can barely breathe. Calvin and I are completely appalled by your behavior tonight." I kept my facial expression completely neutral, though my pulse drummed a steady, calculated rhythm in my ears. "I am curious, Yvonne," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "What exactly is Lauren inconsolable about? Is she upset that she was caught extorting me for a luxury cabin? Or is she upset that I noticed she gave my bed to her yoga instructor?" Calvin's deep, booming voice immediately cut through the speaker, aggressively shutting down my logic. "Do not use that kind of aggressive language with your mother, Zuri," he barked, dripping with defensive hostility. "Lauren is trying to coordinate a massive, complicated event for our 40th anniversary. She has sponsors to please and a brand to protect. She explained everything to us. She said you called her screaming, making wild accusations about her stealing your money just because you are jealous she wanted to bring Trent along for morning wellness sessions. She said you flat out refused to share the space gracefully and threatened to sabotage the entire week." The sheer velocity of the smear campaign was almost impressive. In the 10 minutes it took me to walk from the living room to my office, Lauren had already deployed a full-scale, preemptive psychological strike. She knew I had caught her in a financial scam, so she instantly weaponized her tears to beat me to the punch. She had spun the narrative with breathtaking speed, framing my demand for basic respect as an unhinged, aggressive attack on her generosity. And Yvonne and Calvin had swallowed the lie whole without chewing, without questioning, without a single shred of doubt. "Lauren told us she politely offered you alternative arrangements." Yvonne continued, her voice taking on that lecturing, condescending cadence she usually reserved for unruly children at her church. "She said she tried to accommodate your corporate aesthetic, but you were so hostile and defensive that it was making her physically ill. Zuri, you are a grown woman. You are an educated African-American woman. You are supposed to carry yourself with grace and dignity. You are supposed to be the grounded one. Instead, you are throwing a childish tantrum over a cabin assignment and ruining the spirit of our milestone anniversary." The psychological manipulation was staggering. Yvonne was actively weaponizing my race and my strength against me, demanding that I absorb Lauren's blatant disrespect under the guise of demonstrating grace. I was expected to be the strong, silent black woman who gracefully stepped aside so the fragile, crying white stepdaughter could have her perfect sponsored vacation. I was the villain in my own extortion, completely isolated and framed as the aggressor simply because I refused to be a victim. "I am not throwing a tantrum, Yvonne," I replied, my voice chillingly calm. "I paid $45,000 for a trip that I have now been banned from attending. Do you not find it remotely concerning that your daughter is charging family members triple the market rate to subsidize her own free ride?" "That is exactly the kind of toxic paranoia Lauren was talking about," Calvin interrupted, his voice raising in volume. "You are always trying to find a reason to tear that poor girl down. She does not have a traditional corporate job like you do, Zuri. She relies on these brand deals to survive. She is sharing her connections to get us onto a $30 million superyacht, and all you can do is complain about the price of admission. We are severely disappointed in you. We thought Andre married a woman who understood the value of family unity." "Family unity," I repeated softly. The words tasted like ash. "You believe family unity means I should pay for my husband to go on a luxury vacation without me sharing a room with a strange man while I sit alone in my house. It is only a week." Zuri Yvonne snapped, entirely devoid of empathy. "It is not about you. This trip is about Calvin and me. Lauren has worked herself into the ground to make this special for us. Andre understands that. He is willing to make sacrifices for the greater good of this family. Why do you always have to be so difficult? Why can you never just support her? We fully agree with Andre's decision. It is best if you just stay home. We cannot risk you bringing this dark, angry energy onto the boat and ruining our anniversary. Take the week to reflect on your behavior and prey on your jealousy." I sat in the glow of my monitors, staring at the small black rectangle of my phone. They had completely isolated me. They had rallied around the crying thief and cast out the loyal wife. They had built an impenetrable wall of delusion, convinced of their own righteousness and my supposed villainy. They had no idea that they were scolding the very woman who held the absolute deed to the vessel they were packing their bags for. There was a time in my life when a phone call like this would have broken me. I would have cried, pleaded my case, and desperately tried to present the mathematical proof of Lauren's scam. I would have begged for their love and understanding. But the woman who desperately sought their approval had died in the hallway 20 minutes ago. The woman sitting in the leather chair right now was a chief executive officer evaluating a hostile entity. "You are absolutely right, Yvonne," I said, allowing my voice to soften into a tone of quiet, complete detachment. "I would not want my energy to ruin your milestone celebration. I hope you and Calvin have exactly the anniversary trip that you deserve." "Well, I am glad you are finally seeing reason," Yvonne huffed, entirely oblivious to the lethal double meaning of my words. "We will see you when we get back. Please try to have a better attitude by then." The line went dead. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the desk. The silence in my office was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of my computer tower. The smear campaign was a complete success. Lauren had won the narrative battle. Andre had abandoned me for the sake of peace. Yvonne and Calvin had banished me to protect their luxury aesthetic. I was the outcast, the villain, the jealous wife left behind. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on my mahogany desk. The corners of my mouth slowly curled upward into a sharp, dangerous smile. They had drawn their battle lines completely unaware that they were marching directly into a minefield. I turned my attention back to my glowing monitors, pulled up my encrypted communications portal, and prepared to execute the total financial and social annihilation of my husband's family. The time for playing the gracious, accommodating wife was over. It was time to show them what an angry, difficult woman was truly capable of. The sun breached the horizon, casting a harsh, pale light across the hardwood floors of our hallway. I had not slept a single minute. I spent the entire night locked inside my home office, drafting legal directives, finalizing security protocols for the marina, and orchestrating the absolute dismantling of my husband's immediate future. When I finally emerged holding a mug of black coffee, the house was already vibrating with the frantic, selfish energy of Andre's departure. I stood quietly in the doorway of our master bedroom, sipping my coffee, and watched the man I had vowed to spend my life with pack his bags. Andre was moving with deliberate coldness. He had laid his expensive leather weekender bag open on our king-sized mattress, meticulously folding the linen shirts and tailored swim trunks he had purchased specifically for this trip. He did not look at me when I entered. He simply tightened his jaw and continued smoothing the collar of a light blue polo shirt, making a profound theatrical show of his own inconvenience. His silence was a weapon he had used countless times before. It was designed to make me feel small, to force me into initiating an apology, just to break the suffocating tension in the room. But I was no longer playing my assigned role. I leaned against the doorframe and watched him pack his designer sunglasses and his premium sunscreen, completely unbothered by his silent treatment. When he finally realized I was not going to break down and beg for his forgiveness, his frustration boiled over. He zipped his toiletry bag with aggressive force, threw it into the suitcase, and turned to face me. "I really cannot believe you are doing this, Zuri," he said, his voice dripping with exhausted condescension. "I cannot believe you are actually going to stand there and pout while I have to leave for the airport, feeling like my own wife is trying to sabotage my parents' anniversary." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I am not pouting, Andre. I am simply watching you pack for a vacation that I paid for." He let out a sharp, derisive laugh, running his hands over his face, as if he were dealing with a petulant child. "You are obsessed with the money, Zuri. That is your entire problem. You are so deeply insecure about your background and your little corporate job that you project all of your financial paranoia onto my sister. Lauren did not steal from you. She reallocated the resources to ensure the trip meets the visual standards her sponsors demand. Trent being in that cabin is a logistical necessity for her brand. He is a professional wellness coach. He is working. You are just refusing to understand the luxury space because you are intimidated by it." The gaslighting was breathtaking in its execution. He was standing in the home my income financed, looking me dead in the eye and telling me I was financially insecure. He was actively defending a yoga instructor taking my bed because it was a logistical necessity for a fake influencer. "You are paranoid." Zuri, Andre continued, his voice rising in volume as he paced at the foot of the bed. "You are paranoid. You are jealous. And you are entirely incapable of just letting my family be happy. Every single time my parents try to celebrate a milestone, you find a way to make yourself the victim." Lauren was in tears last night. My mother was having heart palpitations because of the stress you caused. You are literally tearing my family apart because you cannot swallow your pride and let my sister have her moment. He pointed an accusing finger at me, his face twisted in a mask of righteous indignation. You are exactly what Lauren said you were. You are rigid, you are cold, and you lack the grace required to exist in our family dynamic. You should be apologizing to me right now. You should be begging my parents for forgiveness. I listened to every single word. I memorized the cadence of his voice, the arrogant tilt of his chin, and the absolute lack of remorse in his eyes. He was systematically tearing down my character to justify his own monumental cowardice. He needed me to be the villain so he could board that flight feeling like a martyr. If he convinced himself that I was a paranoid, jealous, angry black woman who hated his family, he would not have to face the reality that he was a weak man abandoning his wife for a free ride on a super yacht. Are you quite finished? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, entirely devoid of the emotional reaction he was desperately trying to provoke. Andre stopped pacing. My utter lack of a reaction unnerved him. He was waiting for the tears. He was waiting for the screaming match. He was waiting for the familiar cycle where I defended myself until I was exhausted, ultimately giving up just to restore the peace. My calm, clinical observation rattled the very foundation of his ego. He turned back to the bed and violently yanked the zipper of his weekender bag shut. I am done trying to reason with you, he muttered, grabbing the leather handles and hauling the bag off the mattress. You have made your bed, Zuri. You can lie in it by yourself. I am going to Miami. I am going to celebrate my parents. I am going to have an incredible week on the water with my family, and I am not going to let your toxic energy ruin one single second of my peace. He walked toward me, his heavy bag bumping against his leg. I did not move out of the doorway. I stood my ground, forcing him to stop just inches from my face. We locked eyes. There was no love left in his gaze, only a deep, simmering resentment for the woman who had dared to hold up a mirror to his spineless behavior. I want you to use this week to really think about who you are, Andre said, his voice dropping into a low, authoritative whisper that made my stomach turn. I want you to sit in this quiet house and reflect on your behavior. You need to fix whatever is broken inside you, Zuri. Because when I get back, things are going to change. I am not doing this with you anymore. He leaned forward. He did not embrace me. He did not pull me into his chest. He simply leaned in and pressed a stiff, obligatory kiss against my cheek. His lips felt like ice against my skin. It was the kiss of a stranger fulfilling a societal contract entirely devoid of warmth, affection, or remorse. Have a good week, Zuri, he stated flatly. He stepped around me, brushing his shoulder against mine as he pushed his way into the hallway. I did not turn around to watch him walk away. I stood facing the empty master bedroom, listening to the heavy thud of his shoes against the hardwood floor. I heard the distinct clatter of his keys being snatched from the entryway bowl. I heard the front door open, the rush of morning air sweeping into the foyer, and the loud, definitive slam of the heavy wooden door shutting behind him. The deadbolt clicked into place. A moment later, the low rumble of his car engine echoed through the walls. The tires crunched against the driveway gravel, the sound fading rapidly as he sped down the street, racing toward the airport to meet the very people who despised me. He had actually done it. He had packed his bags, gaslit me into oblivion, and walked out the door, abandoning his wife without a single shred of hesitation. I slowly raised my hand and wiped my cheek where his lips had touched my skin. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the absolute silence of the empty house wash over me. The oppressive weight of my marriage was gone, leaving behind a sharp, crystalline clarity. The betrayal was complete, which meant my obligations as a wife were officially terminated. I turned my back on the empty bedroom and walked straight down the hallway toward my office. My husband had just instructed me to sit in a quiet house and reflect on my behavior. He had told me things were going to change. He had absolutely no idea how remarkably prophetic those words were about to become. The exit was final, but the game was far from over. I placed my coffee mug back on my desk, reached for my phone, and prepared to set the ocean on fire. The heavy oak door shutting was the best sound I had heard in 6 years. It was the sound of a parasite detaching itself from a host. The lingering smell of Andre's cologne hung in the foyer, a pathetic reminder of a man who had chosen a superficial performance over genuine loyalty. I did not collapse against the wall. I did not slide to the floor in a puddle of tears. The grief he expected me to marinate in simply did not exist. Whatever love I once held for my husband had been systematically drained drop by drop, and his final exit was merely the clearing of a blocked drain. I walked back into my home office. The morning sunlight was just beginning to slice through the blinds, casting sharp angles across my mahogany desk. I took my seat in my ergonomic leather chair, the very throne where I had orchestrated corporate takeovers that dismantled legacy companies. I cracked my knuckles, a small physical release of tension, and woke my primary monitor. The woman who had tried to build bridges with her toxic in-laws was dead. The accommodating, quiet, supportive wife had officially tendered her resignation. The entity sitting in that chair was the chief executive officer of a maritime empire, and someone was actively attempting a hostile takeover of my personal property. I opened my encrypted executive portal. I bypassed the standard maritime management systems and accessed the direct satellite communication network for the Oceanic Apex fleet. I located the operational channel for the Sapphire Horizon, currently docked in the exclusive private marina in Miami. I found the direct emergency line for Captain Sterling. I picked up my phone and dialed the number. The line rang exactly once before a crisp, commanding voice answered the call. Captain Sterling speaking. The voice boomed, projecting the authority of a man who had spent 3 decades navigating treacherous waters. "How may I assist you?" "Good morning, Captain," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, stripping away any trace of domestic emotion. "I am calling regarding the anniversary charter launching tomorrow from your slip in Miami." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Mom, I apologize, but all charter inquiries and itinerary adjustments must go through our shore-based concierge team. I cannot authorize any passenger requests directly. The primary charter holder, a Ms. Lauren, has already been very explicit about restricting communication." I smiled, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the smooth surface of my desk. "I appreciate your adherence to protocol, Captain. However, I am not calling as a passenger, and I am certainly not calling on behalf of Lauren. My name is Zuri. You might recognize my holding company as the entity that officially acquired the entire Oceanic Apex fleet 72 hours ago. I am your new owner." The silence that followed was absolute. I could practically hear the gears turning in the captain's head as he cross-referenced the name of the mysterious acquisition firm with the woman currently on his direct satellite line. Captain Sterling was a veteran of the luxury maritime industry. He knew exactly how power operated, and he recognized the unmistakable tone of absolute authority. "My apologies, ma'am," Captain Sterling said, his voice instantly dropping an octave into a tone of supreme, unwavering respect. "I was notified of the acquisition completion yesterday evening by corporate. It is an honor to speak with you. How may the crew and I serve you today?" "We have a situation regarding the current charter." I explained, my tone brisk and tactical. "The family arriving to board the Sapphire Horizon tomorrow morning is my husband's family. They are entirely unaware of my acquisition. They believe they have secured this vessel through a combination of social connections and shared funds. Specifically, the woman named Lauren believes she is the supreme authority on this voyage. She has actively removed me from the passenger manifest and replaced my assigned cabin occupant with an unauthorized guest. That is a severe breach of maritime security protocol, Mom," the captain stated immediately, his professional instincts kicking in. "I will have the shore team cancel the charter immediately. We will deny them access to the marina." "No," I countered, my eyes locked on the glowing screens of my monitors. "Do not cancel the charter. Do not deny them access to the marina. I want them to travel to Miami. I want them to get dressed up in their heavily curated resort wear. I want them to arrive at the security checkpoint and pop their cheap champagne. I want them to taste the salt air and believe they have absolutely won." "I understand," Ma'am, Captain Sterling replied. "What are your specific orders for the boarding procedure?" "When they arrive at the security barricade, you will hold them there," I instructed, detailing the trap with surgical precision. You will allow them to clear the initial marina gate, but you will not permit a single one of them to step foot on the ramp to my ship. You will tell them you are awaiting the final authorization from the vessel owner. You will let Lauren throw whatever tantrum she deems necessary. You will maintain absolute professionalism, but you will not yield an inch of my deck to her. And when will you be arriving, Mom? He asked, clearly catching on to the exact nature of the operation. I will be arriving shortly after they do, I said. When my car pulls up, I want you and your senior crew standing at the bottom of the ramp in full dress whites. You will ignore my husband. You will ignore his parents. You will bypass Lauren entirely. You will approach me and you will address me by my proper title. We are going to provide them with a very clear, very public education on the chain of command. It will be executed exactly to your specifications. Owner. Captain Sterling replied, the hint of a seasoned, knowing smirk coloring his formal tone. The Sapphire Horizon is yours. We will lock down the boarding protocols and await your arrival. Safe travels to Miami. I ended the call and placed the phone back on my desk. The trap was set. The crew was mobilized. The ultimate authority of the vessel had been secured. I minimized the maritime portal and opened a new tab. I navigated to my preferred luxury airline carrier. I did not search for budget-friendly economy seats or use miles to upgrade a basic fare. I booked a direct first-class ticket on the next available flight out of the city. I paid the exorbitant last-minute premium without blinking. I stood up from my desk and walked back into the master bedroom. Andre had taken his cheap fast fashion resort wear and his crippling insecurity with him. He had left behind a closet full of actual, unapologetic luxury. I pulled my designer luggage from the top shelf. This was not the luggage I used for family trips. This was the luggage I used when I flew to Dubai or Monaco to close 8-figure deals. It was sleek, bulletproof, and commanded respect simply by existing. I opened the closet doors and bypassed the neutral, budget-friendly outfits Lauren had suggested I wear, so I would not ruin her aesthetic. I reached for my custom-tailored white linen suit. I selected my vintage silk scarves, my pure gold statement jewelry, and my Italian leather sandals. I packed clothing that screamed of generational wealth, quiet power, and absolute dominance. I was not packing to go on a family vacation. I was packing the uniform of a conqueror preparing to inspect her newly acquired territory. I zipped the luggage shut and caught my reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me was vibrant, fierce, and completely unburdened. For 6 years, I had dulled my own shine to make a weak man feel comfortable in the dark. I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace for a family that hated me. I had diminished my own massive success so they could pretend they were superior. That woman was gone. I grabbed my sunglasses, slid them onto my face, and picked up the handle of my luggage. I walked out of the master bedroom, moving smoothly down the hallway. I did not look back at the life I was leaving behind. I did not spare a single thought for the marriage that had just evaporated. I locked the front door of my house, walked to my waiting private car, and instructed the driver to head to the airport. The flight to Miami was waiting, the sun was shining, the ocean was calling, and I was going to make absolutely certain that my husband and his terrible sister learned exactly what happens when you try to drown the captain of the ship. The air conditioning inside my private black town car hummed a quiet, steady rhythm as my driver pulled into the exclusive loading zone of the Miami superyacht marina. The midday Florida sun was absolutely relentless, beating down on the pristine white concrete of the docks with a fierce, suffocating intensity. I instructed my driver to park in the shaded VIP staging area just yards away from the main entrance, keeping the heavy tinted windows rolled up tightly. From this perfect elevated vantage point, I had a completely unobstructed view of the main security barricade. And there they were. Lauren was putting on a masterclass in performative wealth. She was pacing back and forth in front of the heavy chrome security gates, wearing a blindingly white, heavily branded resort set that looked exactly like the fast fashion dupes she had condescendingly suggested I purchase. She held her smartphone high in the air, attached to a stabilizing gimbal, spinning in slow, dramatic circles, to capture the massive, gleaming hull of the Sapphire Horizon looming majestically in the background. The yacht was a floating fortress of glass steel and polished teak wood radiating absolute maritime power. It was separated from the public dock by a reinforced steel barrier and two security guards standing at strict attention in crisp white uniforms. I could see Lauren's mouth moving rapidly as she spoke to her followers on a live broadcast. She was gesturing wildly toward the vessel, undoubtedly claiming it as her own personal playground for the week, bragging about the exclusive manifestation-fueled luxury she had curated for her dedicated audience. She was completely intoxicated by her own fabricated reality performing for strangers on the internet while standing on the wrong side of a locked gate. Standing just out of the camera's frame, leaning against a stack of heavily logoed luggage that Calvin had definitely paid for, was Trent, the yoga instructor. He was exactly as insufferable as his presence on my stolen manifest suggested. He wore loose, translucent linen pants and a deeply unbuttoned shirt, exposing a chest adorned with beaded necklaces. He was currently attempting to open a bottle of moderately priced sparkling wine with a dramatic, exaggerated flourish. He popped the cork, sending it shooting dangerously close to the marina waters. Lauren briefly paused her live stream to accept a plastic cup of the foaming warm liquid, throwing her head back in staged theatrical laughter so Trent could capture a candid photograph of her, living her best life. Yvonne and Calvin were hovering near the mountain of luggage, physically baking in the oppressive heat. Yvonne was wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat, desperately trying to fan her face with a travel brochure, while Calvin checked his designer replica watch for the 5th time in 3 minutes. They looked exhausted, sweaty, and deeply uncomfortable, but they were still smiling. They were entirely willing to endure extreme physical discomfort if it meant soaking up the residual glamour of their stepdaughter's internet fame. They looked like proud, doting parents, completely untroubled by the fact that their daughter-in-law had been ruthlessly and financially evicted from this family milestone just hours prior. Then my eyes locked onto Andre. My husband was standing slightly apart from the group, adjusting his expensive sunglasses and sipping from a plastic cup of Trent's cheap wine. I watched his body language with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a predictable experiment. I looked for a hint of remorse in his posture. I looked for a shadow of guilt, a quick, anxious glance at his phone to see if his discarded wife had called or texted to beg for his return. There was absolutely nothing. He was laughing loudly at a joke Trent had just made, clapping the much younger man on the shoulder. Andre looked incredibly relaxed, his shoulders loose, his face bright with anticipation. The suffocating tension he always carried when he was forced to balance his family's toxic demands with my basic humanity was completely gone. He had successfully discarded the dead weight, and he was ready to enjoy his free ride. He looked like a man who had absolutely zero regrets about walking out on his marriage. I sat in the plush leather seat of the town car, sipping a bottle of chilled sparkling water, watching this pathetic display of stolen valor. They were popping budget champagne on a sweltering public dock, acting like royalty, while the actual owner of the $30 million vessel sat 30 feet away in a climate-controlled vehicle, completely unbothered. They were so desperately eager to project an image of supreme wealth that they failed to recognize how incredibly cheap they looked stranded on the concrete. The comedy of the situation deepened as I watched Lauren march up to the security barricade for what appeared to be the 3rd time since I arrived. I saw her gesture aggressively toward the sapphire horizon, pointing sharply at her phone screen, and then jabbing her finger toward the 2 stoic security guards blocking her path. The guards, following my explicit overriding instructions from Captain Sterling, did not budge a single inch. They stood with their hands clasped firmly behind their backs, their faces carved from stone. I watched one of the guards shake his head calmly, holding up a flat, unyielding palm to stop Lauren from taking another step toward the boarding ramp. Lauren's aesthetic of effortless luxury was rapidly crumbling under the intense Miami sun. She spun around, her face flushed with heat and rising irritation, and marched back to Andre and her parents. She threw her hands in the air, clearly complaining about the incompetent marina staff who were daring to delay her highly anticipated boarding process. I watched Andre step forward seamlessly, slipping into the role of the protective problem-solving man of the house. He walked up to the security guards, puffing out his chest, attempting to use his authoritative corporate management tone to negotiate their entry. The guards barely even blinked at him. They simply pointed to a restricted access sign secured to the gate and shook their heads again. Andre retreated, his posture deflating, looking thoroughly defeated and thoroughly embarrassed in front of his parents, his stepsister, and the yoga instructor. The timing was absolutely perfect. They were hot, frustrated, and their fragile entitlement was reaching a boiling point. The grand illusion of Lauren's supreme power was fracturing in real time because the physical steel barrier between them and the yacht simply refused to yield to her social media follower count. They were trapped in the humiliating purgatory of the waiting area, staring longingly at a prize they fully believed they had purchased, entirely ignorant of the fact that their entry was entirely contingent upon my singular command. I set my water bottle down in the cup holder. I smoothed the lapels of my crisp, custom-tailored white linen suit. I checked my reflection in the tinted window, ensuring my vintage silk scarf was perfectly draped around my neck, and my pure gold statement jewelry caught the ambient light with uncompromising brilliance. I did not look like a woman who had spent her morning mourning a broken marriage. I looked like a sovereign preparing to inspect a newly conquered territory. I tapped the thick glass partition separating me from my driver. I told him it was time. I instructed him to pull the car slowly out of the shadowed VIP staging area and drive directly up to the main security barricade, right to the exact spot where my husband and his family were currently sweating, complaining, and desperately waiting for a miracle. The heavy tires of my black town car rolled over the sun-baked concrete, gliding to a smooth, silent halt directly behind the small gathering at the security barricade. The sudden arrival of an executive vehicle drew the immediate attention of the entire group. Trent paused mid-sip, lowering his plastic cup of cheap sparkling wine. Calvin adjusted his posture instinctively, trying to project an air of authority for whoever was inside the tinted glass. Lauren immediately perked up her eyes, darting toward the vehicle, likely assuming it was the yacht's concierge team finally coming to apologize for the delay and usher her aboard. My driver stepped out, moving with crisp military precision. He walked around the rear of the vehicle and opened my door. I stepped out into the sweltering Miami heat. My tailored white linen suit caught the midday sun, radiating a blinding, untouchable brilliance. My gold jewelry clinked softly as I adjusted my vintage silk scarf. I closed the car door behind me with a solid, definitive thud that echoed across the marina. The reaction was instantaneous. The performative joy radiating from my husband's family shattered like fragile glass dropped on a marble floor. Yvonne actually gasped, her hand flying to her chest, as if she had just seen a ghost. Calvin froze, his brow furrowing in deep, angry confusion. Andre, the man who had abandoned me in our living room just hours prior, went entirely rigid, his eyes widened in sheer panic. But true to his absolute cowardice, the moment he registered my presence, he physically turned his body away. He turned his back to me, staring out at the harbor, desperately trying to shrink into the background and pretend this confrontation was not happening. He was hoping that if he did not acknowledge me, he would not have to deal with the fallout. Lauren, however, did not shrink. Her initial shock rapidly morphed into vicious defensive outrage. She thrust her phone into Trent's chest, shoving the device at her yoga instructor so she could free her hands. She marched directly toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the concrete, stopping just on the other side of the security barricade. She looked me up and down, taking in my immaculate attire, and a cruel, mocking laugh erupted from her throat. "I told you to go home, Zuri," she sneered, her voice loud enough to echo down the public dock. She waved her hand dismissively in my direction, leaning over the velvet rope of the security barrier. "You are not on the guest list. I made that perfectly clear last night. I do not know why you thought showing up here in a rented town car wearing a costume would change my mind. You are embarrassing yourself. Security will not even let you on the dock." She turned her head to look at the two stone-faced guards flanking the gate. "Excuse me?" she barked at them, snapping her fingers. This woman is harassing my family. She is not part of our charter. I need you to escort her off the marina property immediately. She is ruining the aesthetic of our boarding process." The guards did not move. They did not blink. They stared straight ahead, completely ignoring her shrill demands. Lauren scoffed, turning her attention back to me. Her face was flushed red with heat and deep irritation. "Do you see this, Zuri? You cannot force your way into spaces where you do not belong. Andre already told you to stay in the suburbs. Have some dignity and leave before I call the actual police. You are just not our vibe and you never will be." I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply looked at her, my expression completely serene, and offered a soft, knowing smile. I let her wallow in her own miserable, fabricated superiority for a few more seconds. I let her believe she was the apex predator of this family dynamic. Just then, a sharp, synchronized sound echoed from the polished teak deck of the Sapphire Horizon. It was the distinct, rhythmic sound of heavy footsteps marching in perfect unison down the metal boarding ramp. I shifted my gaze past Lauren's angry face. Captain Sterling was descending the ramp dressed in his immaculate, crisp white maritime uniform. His epaulets gleamed in the sunlight, projecting absolute maritime authority. Behind him marched the senior crew, including the chief stewardess, the executive chef, and the deck boatswain. They moved with absolute precision, an imposing wall of professional power gliding toward the security barricade. Lauren immediately spun around, her demeanor changing in a fraction of a second. The angry, hostile stepsister vanished instantly, replaced by the glowing, entitled influencer. She flashed a brilliant, highly rehearsed smile smoothing down her fast-fashion resort wear. She assumed the captain was finally coming to greet her, to apologize profusely for the delay, and to welcome her aboard her luxury playground so she could begin filming her content. "Oh, finally," Lauren sighed dramatically, casting a smug, victorious glance over her shoulder at me. "Watch and learn, Zuri. This is how important people are treated." Lauren stepped right up to the very edge of the barricade, practically vibrating with anticipation. She extended her hand, ready to graciously accept the captain's apology and demand that he handle the unwanted wife lingering behind her. Captain Sterling reached the security gate. He did not look at Lauren. He did not look at Yvonne, Calvin, or Trent. He completely ignored the hand Lauren had extended toward him. He walked straight past her, his focus locked entirely and unequivocally on me. The security guards immediately unclipped the velvet rope and stepped aside, clearing a wide, unobstructed path. Captain Sterling stopped squarely in front of me. He snapped his heels together. The senior crew lined up flawlessly behind him. In perfect synchronized motion, the captain and his entire crew bowed their heads in a gesture of profound, unwavering respect. "Welcome aboard, owner Captain Sterling," said his deep voice carrying clearly across the silent marina. "Your vessel is ready." The silence that slammed into the dock was absolute. It was a suffocating, heavy vacuum that sucked the oxygen right out of the lungs of everyone standing behind me. The world seemed to stop spinning on its axis. I watched Lauren's hand slowly drop to her side. Her jaw went completely slack. The smug, victorious sneer melted off her face, replaced by a look of visceral, earth-shattering horror. Her eyes darted from Captain Sterling to the bowing crew, and finally back to me. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her brain was completely incapable of processing the words she had just heard. The reality of her situation was too massive, too terrifying to comprehend. She was not the master of this domain. She was a trespasser standing at the gates of my kingdom. Behind her, the entire family dynamic imploded in real time. Yvonne let out a strangled, breathless wheeze, dropping her travel brochure onto the concrete, where it fluttered in the ocean breeze. Calvin stood paralyzed, his eyes bulging out of his head as he stared at the crisp white uniform of the captain, bowing to his black daughter-in-law. Trent, the yoga instructor, took a slow, deliberate step backward, suddenly realizing he was standing in the blast zone of a massive financial and social detonation. He clutched his healing crystals, looking for a quick exit. But the most satisfying, deeply poetic reaction belonged to my husband. At the sound of the word owner, Andre finally turned around. He spun slowly, his body stiff with an unspeakable dread. He looked at the towering superyacht. He looked at the senior crew bowing in submission, and then he looked directly at me. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him a pale, sickly shade of gray. The man who had mocked my corporate job, who had told me I was too financially insecure to understand luxury, who had abandoned me to appease his entitled family, was currently watching his wife command the absolute allegiance of a $30 million maritime fleet. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. The $45,000 wire transfer, the quiet confidence, the absolute lack of tears when he walked out the door. It all clicked into place, snapping his spine of arrogance completely in half. He had not abandoned a struggling hospitality worker. He had walked out on a multi-millionaire chief executive officer who possessed the power to crush his entire existence with a single word. He saw the white linen suit, the gold jewelry, the unapologetic power, radiating from every pore of my body, and he knew instantly that his life as he knew it was over. I did not break eye contact with Andre. I let him feel the full crushing weight of his catastrophic mistake. I let him drown in the agonizing knowledge that he had actively chosen a fake influencer over a titan of industry. I wanted him to savor the taste of his own ruin. "Thank you, Captain Sterling," I replied, my voice ringing out clear and authoritative in the humid air. "The crew has done an exceptional job preparing the vessel." "It is our absolute privilege, ma'am," the captain responded, standing tall. He gestured toward the gleaming ramp of the sapphire horizon. "Shall I have the crew load your luggage and show you to the primary master suite?" I smiled, a slow, predatory curving of my lips. "Yes, Captain. Please handle my bags. But before we board, there is a minor logistical issue we need to address regarding the unauthorized individuals currently loitering in my private boarding area." Captain Sterling nodded, stepping seamlessly to my right, creating an impenetrable wall of authority between myself and the panicked group on the concrete. I turned my attention back to the barricade, letting my eyes sweep over the terrified faces of my in-laws before landing squarely on Lauren. The influencer was hyperventilating, her chest heaving under her cheap white resort wear. She was frantically shaking her head, desperately trying to reject the reality unfolding right in front of her. "This is a joke," Lauren stammered, her voice cracking as she looked wildly at her parents and then at my husband. "Andre, tell her to stop playing games. She does not own this boat. She is a hotel receptionist. Tell them she is lying." Andre remained absolutely frozen, his eyes glued to the pavement, entirely incapable of saving her. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the velvet rope. "There is no game being played, Lauren," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear over the sound of the ocean breeze. "I acquired the Oceanic Apex fleet exactly 3 days ago. The corporate escrow account you used to collect my $45,000 penalty deposit belongs to my holding company. You did not rent a super yacht. You made a direct wire transfer into my personal wealth portfolio." Lauren staggered backward as if I had physically struck her. She dropped her smartphone. The device hit the concrete with a sharp crack, the screen shattering, completely terminating whatever live broadcast she had been running for her imaginary audience. "You cannot do this!" Lauren shrieked, the carefully cultivated, soothing pitch of her wellness persona entirely evaporating into a shrill, hysterical panic. "I have signed contracts with luxury sponsors. I have content deliverables due this week. I need this boat, Zuri. You have to let us on. I paid for this charter." "You paid a fractional deposit using my money," I corrected her smoothly. "And as the chief executive officer of this maritime fleet, I am officially executing my right to refuse service." I turned my head slightly, addressing the captain without taking my eyes off Lauren. "Captain Sterling, I am formally revoking this charter effective immediately. Please cite Section 4 of the Passenger Code of Conduct, which explicitly allows ownership to terminate any voyage due to hostile, abusive, or discriminatory behavior toward the staff or the proprietors." "Understood, owner," Captain Sterling replied loudly. He raised his hand and gave a sharp tactical hand signal to the 2 security guards stationed at the gate. The charter is cancelled. Clear the dock. The two massive security guards immediately stepped forward, moving with intimidating synchronization. They unclipped the heavy velvet ropes and marched directly toward the mountain of heavily branded luggage Calvin had piled on the pavement. At the same time, 4 members of the yacht deck crew jogged down the ramp to assist in the eviction, grabbing the expensive suitcases and rolling them aggressively back toward the public loading zone. Trent, the yoga instructor, took one look at the advancing security team and made a rapid, highly practical career decision. He reached down, snatched his single canvas duffel bag and his rolled-up yoga mat from the pile, and backed away from the family. "Hey, man. I am just an independent contractor," Trent said, holding his hands up in surrender. "I teach vinyasa flow. I do not want any legal trouble." He did not even look at Lauren. He simply turned around and fast-walked down the marina promenade, entirely abandoning his luxury meal ticket at the first sign of actual consequences. "Trent, come back here!" Lauren screamed, her face turning a violent, blotchy shade of crimson. She lunged forward, trying to grab her damaged phone from the ground, while simultaneously reaching for a passing security guard who was hauling her suitcase away. "Do not touch my things. Do you know who I am? I will destroy this company on social media. I will ruin you." Her aesthetic completely disintegrated. The effortless, neutral-toned resort influencer was gone. In her place was a red-faced, screaming woman throwing a catastrophic temper tantrum on a public dock. Her mascara was beginning to run in the sweltering heat, and her voice had grown so loud and unhinged that other tourists and boat owners down the marina were stopping to watch the spectacle. Yvonne stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached across the security barrier, trying to play the ultimate card of maternal guilt. "Zuri, sweetheart. Please," Yvonne begged, large tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "Let us not do this. It is our 40th anniversary. We are family. We can go inside and talk about this like adults. Please do not leave us stranded out here." I looked at the woman who had called me just 12 hours ago to demand I stay home and prey on my jealousy. I looked at the woman who had eagerly accepted my erasure so her stepdaughter could take aesthetically pleasing photographs. "Family does not tell a wife to stay home so a stranger can take her bed," I stated, my tone dropping into a cold, absolute 0. Family does not watch a woman get racially belittled at a dinner table and smile in agreement. You raised a daughter who believes she can steal to fund her delusions, and you raised a son who believes he can abandon his wife to avoid a difficult conversation. You enabled this exact moment, Yvonne. You are reaping the harvest of your own toxic creation. I stepped back, signaling the end of the negotiation. "Have a wonderful anniversary in Miami. I hear the public beaches are lovely this time of year." The security guards moved in, physically stepping between the weeping older couple and the entrance to the dock. "Mom, sir, you need to vacate the private marina immediately," the lead guard commanded, using his broad shoulders to corral Calvin and Yvonne toward the public street. Lauren was fully hyperventilating now, stomping her feet against the concrete as a deckhand wheeled her final luxury trunk away from the gate. She was screaming obscenities, sobbing uncontrollably, as her entire fabricated universe was violently repossessed. The crew systematically pushed them back yard by yard, stripping away their dignity under the blazing Florida sun until they were standing on the public curb, surrounded by their luggage, completely humiliated in front of dozens of watching strangers. The eviction was swift, merciless, and entirely absolute. The dock was cleared. The hostile elements had been successfully purged from my perimeter. I stood in the quiet shade of the security barrier, taking a deep, cleansing breath of the salty ocean air. I turned my attention to the only piece of trash left to take out. I locked my eyes on Andre, who was still standing frozen just a few feet away, watching his family get thrown onto the street like common criminals. Andre slowly turned his head back toward me. The reality of the eviction had finally pierced through his thick skull. He looked at the massive yacht, then at the security team, and finally at my immaculate white linen suit. His eyes were wide, frantic, and filled with a sudden, sickening desperation. He took a hesitant step forward, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Zuri," Andre choked out, his voice cracking under the weight of his own monumental stupidity. "Zuri, baby, wait. Please just wait a minute. Let us talk about this." He closed the distance between us, practically tripping over his own expensive leather loafers. The arrogant, dismissive man who had kissed my cheek and told me to reflect on my behavior was completely gone. In his place was a trembling, pathetic shell of a husband who had just realized he threw away a winning lottery ticket to pick up a piece of trash. "You own this," Andre stammered, gesturing wildly at the sapphire horizon. "You own the whole company. How is that even possible? Why did you not tell me? If I had known you were doing this, if I had known you had this kind of capital, I never would have let Lauren speak to you that way. I would have put a stop to it immediately." I stared at him, letting his confession hang in the humid Miami air. He was completely oblivious to how entirely damning his own words were. He was admitting loudly and proudly that his respect for me was entirely conditional upon my financial portfolio. He was admitting that my basic human dignity was not worth defending, but my bank account was. "You did not know," I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "You are right, Andre. You did not know about the holding company. You did not know about the maritime acquisitions. You did not know that my net worth eclipsed your entire family's generational lineage. But you did know that your sister replaced me with her yoga instructor." Andre swallowed hard, his eyes darting back and forth as he desperately searched for a lifeline. "I was just trying to keep the peace, Zuri. You know how my parents get. I thought you were just a hospitality consultant. I thought you were overreacting about the money. You thought I was poor, so you let them treat me like a peasant," I clarified smoothly. "You thought my job was insignificant, so you allowed your unemployed sister to disrespect my grind. You chose to protect Lauren's fragile sponsored aesthetic over your own wife's presence on a family vacation." Andre reached out, attempting to grab my hands. I took a sharp step back, giving him a look so lethal it froze him in his tracks. "I am your husband," he pleaded, his voice breaking into a humiliating whine. "What is yours is mine, Zuri. We are a team. We can fix this. I will go out there right now and tell my parents to go back to the airport. I will tell Lauren we are cutting her off. Just let me on the boat. We can celebrate this massive win together, just the two of us." The sheer desperation was a masterclass in financial survival. He was willing to throw his precious family directly under the bus the absolute second he realized my net worth. The fierce, unyielding loyalty he claimed to have for his parents and his stepsister vanished into thin air at the sight of a $30 million superyacht. I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out a sleek, heavy, midnight blue leather folder. It was embossed with the logo of the most ruthless family law firm in Atlanta. I held the folder out toward him. Andre looked at the leather-bound document, a spark of desperate hope lighting up his eyes. He reached for it, his hands shaking clearly, assuming it was some sort of maritime ownership deed or a VIP boarding pass I had saved just for him. He took the folder, flipped it open, and looked at the top page. The color completely drained from his face for the second time that day. He read the heavy black text printed across the top of the legal document. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." "You did not need to know my net worth to know my worth as your wife," I said, looking him dead in the eye, delivering the ultimate fatal strike. "You had every opportunity to stand up and be a man. You chose to be a coward. I had my legal team draft these the exact second you walked out our front door this morning." Andre stared at the divorce papers, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. His hands trembled so violently the heavy paper rustled in the quiet air. "The locks on the house have already been changed," I continued, my voice sharp and clinical. "My assets, which were always legally separated through a blind trust, remain entirely untouchable. You are walking away from this marriage with exactly what you brought into it: a fragile ego and a toxic family." I turned to Captain Sterling, who was standing at silent attention just a few feet away. "Captain, this man is not authorized to approach the vessel. If he attempts to cross the barricade, have security handle him with extreme prejudice." "Understood perfectly, owner," the captain replied, his posture rigid and commanding. I did not wait for Andre to speak. I did not wait for the tears I could see welling up in his eyes. I turned my back on the man who had abandoned me and walked toward the boarding ramp. The sound of my heels against the polished metal rang out like a steady drumbeat of victory. As I stepped onto the gleaming teak deck of the Sapphire Horizon, the heat of the Miami concrete was instantly replaced by the cool, refreshing ocean breeze sweeping across the harbor. The entire senior crew was lined up along the port side, their uniforms immaculate, their postures flawless. As I walked past them, they offered crisp, synchronized nods of respect. There were no judgmental whispers. There were no microaggressions about my clothing or my background. There was only the absolute, undeniable reverence reserved for a self-made titan. I walked up the sweeping glass staircase leading to the upper deck, moving with a lightness I had not felt in 6 years. I heard the deep rumbling mechanical groan of the boarding ramp being mechanically lifted and secured. I glanced over the glass railing. Down below, stranded on the sweltering concrete, Andre was a pathetic, shrinking figure. He was clutching the divorce papers to his chest, standing completely alone. His family was nowhere to be seen, having already been chased off the premises by the marina security. He had lost his wife, he had lost his future, and he had lost his free ride. He was nothing more than a discarded liability shrinking in my rearview mirror. The massive twin engines of the superyacht roared to life, sending a powerful, vibrating hum through the soles of my shoes. The heavy mooring lines were cast off by the deckhands. The Sapphire Horizon gently pushed away from the dock, the deep turquoise water churning brilliant white beneath the hull. The chief stewardess, a professional woman with a warm, genuine smile, approached me carrying a silver tray. Resting on the polished metal was a crystal flute filled with a rare vintage champagne that cost more than Lauren's entire annual wardrobe budget. "Welcome aboard, Mom," she said smoothly. "We are setting a course for the Bahamas. The primary master suite has been prepared exactly to your specifications." I took the crystal flute, the chilled glass cold against my fingers. "Thank you," I replied. "Please tell the chef I will be ready for the tasting menu by sunset." I walked to the absolute edge of the aft deck. The yacht picked up speed, gliding effortlessly out of the marina and toward the vast open expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The Miami skyline began to shrink into a glittering, insignificant horizon. The suffocating weight of Andre, Yvonne, Calvin, and Lauren was completely gone, left behind in the humid, stagnant air of the city dock. I took a slow sip of the champagne. The crisp, complex flavor exploded on my tongue, tasting exactly like vindication. For years, I had allowed myself to be anchored to a family that was determined to pull me underwater. I had dimmed my own brilliance to make their mediocrity feel comfortable. But the ocean does not apologize for its depth, and I was finally done apologizing for mine. The wind caught my hair, blowing wild and free as the bow of the ship cut through the deep sapphire waves. I looked out at the endless horizon, breathing in the cleanest, freshest air I had ever tasted. I had taken out the trash, and in doing so, I had secured the most beautiful, unobstructed view in the entire world. The journey ahead was mine alone, and the water was absolutely perfect. The most profound lesson from Zuri's journey is that you should never shrink yourself to accommodate the insecurities of toxic people. For years, she muted her brilliance and success just to maintain a fragile peace in a marriage that offered her no protection. Her story teaches us that true power often moves in silence, but it must strike fiercely when boundaries are crossed. Enabling disrespect only invites further betrayal. Ultimately, walking away from those who fail to see your worth isn't a loss. It is the ultimate liberation. Your dignity is the one asset you must never compromise. If you have ever had to cut toxic ties to reclaim your peace, share your story in the comments below and hit that subscribe button for more empowering content.